everyone.
Hey.
Just so, all right. So, my set, I tried to make it funny, at least this first part. I don't know how, I don't know how well that's going to go because what I'm going to talk about is still happening in to some degree, and it really is not funny. But I will find a way, however. So, um, there was a study done, an informal study done on medical students. So, the country's finest and brightest people who are studying to be doctors. And one of the questions on this survey asked, do Black people feel pain?
Oh,
And an alarming number of them said, no, they don't. And another part of this question was, is their skin thicker? And is that why they don't feel pain? And they were all like, yes. So I fell off my unicorn when I heard that, because how can we not feel pain? And then the more I thought about it and the more research I did, it's horrible, because like that was a myth. It is a myth that still exists today in some degree, but it was used against Black people. That was the reasoning that was used in order to use Black people as medical test guinea pigs. Like, for example, James Marion Sims, he's considered the father of modern gynecology. And he conducted his research on enslaved Black women without anesthesia because of the racist notion that Black people didn't feel pain. And also the fact that in those days, Black people weren't even considered fully human. And he pioneered tools and surgical techniques related to women's reproductive health by testing on these women without anesthesia. All he needed was the permission of their owners, which is appalling. And the thing is, the use of Black bodies as medical test subjects falls into a long, ethically bereft history that includes the Tuskegee syphilis study and Henrietta Lacks. So for those of you who don't know, the Tuskegee syphilis study was a study in the 30s, and it lasted for 40 years. It went on for 40 years, where these doctors wanted to observe the natural progression and natural history of untreated syphilis. So they targeted poor Black men. They were mainly sharecroppers in the South, and told them that they were receiving free health care from the federal government of the United States, and they were not. So there was a control group of men who did not have syphilis, but then there was a larger group that they injected them with syphilis, did not treat them, gave them placebos, told them that they were treating them, and just followed them for decades, up until the 70s. Now, Henrietta Lacks, there isn't a person alive who hasn't benefited from the contribution of this woman. And her cells, she died in the 1950s at a young age. I think she was about 32, from ovarian cancer or cervical cancer. And doctors took her cells without her consent and without her knowledge. And those cells are still alive today. And they've been used in all kinds of developments of medications, treatments, and everything without her consent. So somebody's making millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and her family has not seen 1 cent of it. And they were taken without her knowledge, without her consent. Her children were also used in research without their consent in the 70s. And their medical history and medical records were distributed, released, and published to the press without their permission. And there's just so much more stuff um, that happened there. Another alarming statistic is that today, in like 2021, 2020, in modern times, at the most technologically and medically advanced time in history, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from complications of childbirth across the world. And education doesn't matter, income doesn't matter. It's ethnic and racial disparities are to blame. And this crap has to stop. I'm sure you'll all agree. It needs to stop. Now, when I was younger, there was a time when I was not treated properly by the people I went to for help. When I was in my early 20s, I had a very serious hand injury, and I went to the hospital, and the nurse brushed me off. She basically said, it doesn't hurt. Meanwhile, my hand was all twisted and I was in serious pain. And when I stood up for myself and said, you know what, I'm in a lot of pain and you really need to take me seriously, she admonished me for my attitude and told me that she wasn't paid enough to deal with this from the likes of me. I left. I was upset and I left. My father took me to another hospital where they examined me and determined that I needed surgery. So I actually had to have surgery on the hand. A dentist wanted to fill a cavity without freezing me. And I was like, what? I don't think so. And he's like, it's just a small one. It'll take like a minute. I'm like, that's a minute too long to be drilling into my head without freezing me. I don't think so. And I left because no, that's not going to happen. And for years, if I knew I was going to a new healthcare provider, I dressed up. I dressed up like I was going to work because I knew I'd be treated better. You know, I remember cutting myself badly, like almost severing a finger in the kitchen. But I took the time to do my hair, change my clothes, put on some makeup while bleeding to death before I went to the hospital because I knew that subconsciously I'd be treated better, which makes me really angry and really sad at the same time. So like I still do that now. Like if I know I'm 54, I'll be 54 next week. And if I know that I'm going to a new healthcare provider, whether it's a new therapist or a dentist or a chiropractor, any sort of healthcare provider, I make sure I'm presentable, which shouldn't be the case. Like I should be able to go in, if I need help, if I need medical care, I should be able to go in whatever condition I'm in and get treated properly. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. That's not always the case. I had to be admitted to hospital a few years ago. And when I asked for a private or a semi-private room, the first thing that the admin person said to me was, you have to pay for those. And I was like, bitch, I know. Are there any available? You know? And then of course she was like, do you have insurance? And I was like, yes, I do. So that was a whole thing. But before that, what brought me to the point of having to be admitted to hospital was, like Tony had told you about, I had a very serious issue with fibroids that made me bleed very heavily. And I bled heavily, like heavily. I can't even begin to describe how heavy. For 11 days, I bled. And the whole time I was like, part of me was like, you should really go to the hospital. And I was like, I feel silly. I feel stupid going to the hospital about my period. You know, we're like so conditioned to not take our health seriously. So I didn't go. So it was like 11 days later that I was weak and I was hallucinating and I was like shaking and dizzy that I was like, I have to go to the hospital. And when I got there, the nurse, who was very kind, was like, "Why did you wait so long?" And I was like, "Oh my God." you know? So I had to explain the whole, I felt silly coming for my period. And she's like, "If you're bleeding from anywhere profusely for more than a week, you need to get your ass to a hospital." So I was like, okay, note taken. I'll remember that for next time. Hopefully there's not a next time. Anyway, 11 days later, I was in the hospital for 5 days and I required 4 blood transfusions. That's how bad things were. I remember the doctor who the how was it? So I was seen by an emergency room doctor, and then when I was admitted, a doctor from the gynecologist I had been seeing had come to see me that evening. And I remember I was freaked out. I was afraid. I was scared. And I remember I asked her point blank, "Am I dying?" And she was like, "Not anymore." And I was like, "What?" But it was the type of thing that had they not been able to stop the bleeding, they would have rushed me into surgery and just taken everything out. But I was grateful that I was taken seriously. Um, so all of that to say that, like, we have to advocate for ourselves and for each other, because I used to worry about like appearing difficult, or just inconveniencing, the medical or healthcare providers. But you know what? When it comes to your physical or your mental health, you have to speak up. We have to speak up, because, like, for too long, women, people who identify as women, women of color, our medical concerns are dismissed too often, way too often. On another note, mental health issues, I was only properly diagnosed. I have mental health issues that I've dealt with since childhood, and I was finally properly diagnosed about 5 years ago. 5 years ago, after I literally kicked up a storm and kicked and like made a fuss, that I was like, "No, I'm not tired. No, yeah, I broke up with my boyfriend, but that's not it." you know Too often people like to just dismiss our physical as well as our mental issues, and say, "Oh, just don't eat dairy," or, "Oh, lay off the chocolate," or, "Oh, don't drink so much," or something. Or like Aaron had said, they see a certain thing, "Oh, it's because you're fat," or whatever it is. And it's like, no, no, I'm telling you, I we all know our own bodies better than anybody. And it's our responsibility to tell our healthcare providers what we need and what is happening. And it's their responsibility to listen to us, to not infantilize us, not to dismiss us or admonish us or chastise us. They need to listen. They need to listen to us, and appear difficult. Be difficult. Let them think you're difficult. It doesn't matter. It's your life. It's your health. It's your quality of life. And that is so important. And the thing is, like I said before, we have to advocate for ourselves as well as for each other. Because I'm full of facts today. Another thing is, like, in Canada, where I live, um, heart disease is the number one killer of women. If it's not number one, it's number two, but it's high up there. And yes, I see a comment that says take up space. Yes, absolutely, take up space. Um, heart disease is the number one killer of women in Canada. And that shouldn't be. But the reason it is because all the studies on heart attacks and strokes and cardiovascular systems have been studied on men, primarily on white men. And the thing is, they use white men as a standard for medical care, and without realizing that we're not all the same. We're not all the same. Women, and they've only discovered this recently, like in the last, I don't know, 2 decades, that women present different symptoms for heart attacks. We present different symptoms. They could be more subtle than, clutching your chest and you're having searing pain in your chest. No, it could be, a pain in the jaw, you know, numbness in the fingers, things that we can like, oh, I was sitting on my hands, or oh, I was in one position for a very long time. So I think it's only now that the medical community is saying, hey, not everyone's the same. Oh, hey, people present symptoms for diseases differently. Not everyone has these cookie cutter symptoms, you know, and that has to be taken seriously. But until it's the norm, until it's the norm, until a woman can walk in to an office and say, you know what, I've been having pain here, pain there, and they hook us up to machines and test the, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear here, but test the F out of us instead of telling us to like, just have a tea and meditate. When our health is taken as seriously as men's health, and that's the norm, we have to keep advocating for ourselves and we have to keep learning. And I know I'm bad for like Googling symptoms, because then I go into a big hole and I'm like, oh God, my head needs to be amputated. So don't be like me like this. If you can Google responsibly, do so. I am not a responsible. Yes, somebody says everything is cancer. Yeah, exactly. It's like, if you can Google responsibly, do it. Because I'm the type of person that it's like, oh, I have my knee's been hurting me for a while. I'll Google knee pain and then I'll be like, oh God, oh God, oh God, I'm going to lose my legs, sort of thing. But if I eat cornflakes, it'll feel better.
Yep.
So you've got to know your sources and everything. But yeah, like I can't stress enough of the importance of advocating for yourself. And like I lost my parents within the last 6 years. I lost my mom 2.5 years ago, excuse me, and my father 5 years ago. And one of the things that I remember when my father was going in for surgery, he was being admitted to the hospital the night before. And I grew up in Montreal, and the hospital that they were at was a primarily Francophone hospital. My parents spoke very little French. And so we got to the hospital, and I remember I was shocked at how much French was there and that my parents didn't speak French. And I was like, are you sure you're having the right surgery? Like, are you sure? Sort of thing. Let me read the papers, sort of thing. Everything was fine. But I was concerned because there was a language barrier between, the administration, the medical staff, and my parents, because very few people spoke English. My parents spoke very, very little, if none, if at all, French. So my concern was like, have you gotten all the correct information? Are you sure you need the surgery, sort of thing? But yeah, like I said, we have to advocate for each other and for ourselves. And that's really all I have to say right now. So I'm sorry it wasn't like slap your knee funny, but I just thought it was important information that we all should know. And that saying from Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. So hopefully with this extra knowledge, we can all do better for each other and for ourselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you.